Welcome to the Feds, insiders bringing accountability, integrity, and reform to a broken bureaucracy. At Feds for Freedom, we value constructive dissent and healthy debate. The views and opinions shared in today's episode are those of the speaker alone and do not express the views or opinions of the U.S. government or any other employer.
Welcome back to this week's episode of The Feds, where we seek a transparent and accountable government. I am Stephanie Weidel. Before we begin, please like this episode. Visit our website where you can stay up to date with what's going on within Feds for Freedom at fedsforfreedom.org. Today, we are joined again by Garret O'Boyle, FBI Congressional whistleblower, who was wrongly suspended without pay, promised restoration under the new Trump administration, and has not yet been reinstated. Garret, thank you so much for joining me. It is wonderful to see you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
Garret, it's been a year and a half since we've seen you on this podcast. A lot has happened, and not enough, though, between then and now. Would you remind us, though, what you saw as an FBI agent that caused you to become a congressional whistleblower?
Of course, yeah, it's been quite the ride, and it continues, unfortunately, into this new administration. But going back, I was hired on by the FBI as a special agent in 2018, and then, as I'm sure most of your listeners know, the COVID mandates came down in September of 2021, and that's kind of the root of where everything started for me. And I've said before that the scales sort of fell from my eyes because I had seen things along the way in just the few years I had been there at the time where I would think, are they doing something intentionally that they know is wrong? Or is it just a lack of knowledge, a lack of training, a lack of understanding the law or the Constitution? And always from my perspective, I was disappointed because I thought the FBI was going to be filled with people who really cared about the Constitution, really cared about their job to the point where they would know and understand the law. And if they didn't, they would ensure that they did. And in those first few years, I would just kind of overlook it or think like, maybe they just don't know what they're talking about. But then after COVID, not everything, but so many things would happen then where I would say that's wrong. And somebody probably needs to know about that. For instance, some of the things I blew the whistle on, the FBI has what are called threat tags. And so I blew the whistle on two of those. One of them was called Threats to SCOTUS 2022. And this was in the wake of the Hobbs decision. And there were legitimate threats to Supreme Court justices at the time. And there are laws that are supposed to protect justices and judges in general at the federal level. But then once you started to dive into the guidance of what that threat tag was, it became clear that it was to target pro-life individuals, which, as anybody who has a reasonable brain could conclude, pro-life people were happy about the Dobbs decision. So, and then within short order of finding out about that, it was within one day, I then was tasked with interviewing a confidential human source, which is what the FBI calls their informants. And it had all these questions that were clearly anti people who were pro-life. And I had a CHS who was a longtime person in the pro-life movement. And even when I asked him these questions, he was like, he was really like kind of taken aback by it. And he's like, why are you asking questions like this? And I said, look, I was tasked from headquarters to ask you these questions. And it was things like, who in the pro-life movement is going to engage in some sort of violent activity in the wake of the Hobbs decision? And it's like, nobody. It's going to be people on the other side who are going to do that. So that was one I blew the whistle on. Then there's the famous school boards issue. So there was a threat tag. This one was actually before the Threats to SCOTUS threat tag. And this one, I actually forget what the title of it was, but it was a threat tag that basically indicated that the FBI was going to start looking at parents who were attending school board meetings and who had issues with government curriculum. And the FBI resisted Congress in giving them information regarding that threat tag. And they said, no, we're not going to use counterterrorism methods to look at parents. No, we would never do anything like that. And then there was one of the largest school teacher unions in the country who basically lobbied Merrick Garland, who was the attorney general at the time, to get the DOJ to do just that, to look at parents. And then a different whistleblower, this is actually how I first became aware of this threat tag. In October of 2021, I think it was multiple whistleblowers. They came out and they had this email and this guidance from the FBI, which included the FBI's CTD, which is the Counterterrorism Division. So it was a joint email from CTD and CID, which is the FBI's Criminal Investigative Division. And it had the threat tag in there, and it was to be used to go after parents. And fast forward a little bit, once I was suspended 8 months later, which we're right around the 2-year mark of that now, in May of 2023, I testified to Congress. And when I testified, Jim Jordan, he said in our hearing that he believed that the reason I was retaliated against so ferociously was because I blew the whistle on that school board's threat tag, because I provided information about cases that the FBI was trying to open, and really just showing that it was negligent on the FBI's behalf, and potentially even criminal on the FBI's behalf to be doing this, because they clearly were, in some instances, going after parents for First Amendment related issues. And that's not supposed to be what law enforcement does. You're supposed to be able to enjoy your First Amendment freely and not worry about the FBI coming to knock on your door. There's a handful of others, which we could keep going if you want, but my lawyers actually published a letter that they sent back in April of this year, and it kind of lays out the most consequential protected disclosures I made, and there's somewhere around 20 of them in there.
Mm. So what was the reason that the FBI gave to suspend you?
Right. So a little bit on that backstory, which we covered last time, but I was in the middle of a transfer from Kansas City, from the Kansas City division. I was down in Wichita, and I was transferring back to Quantico is where the unit was at that I was headed to. I tried out for this unit. They told me that they wanted me. This wasn't just a normal transfer. It was a new unit the FBI was creating, that they were trying to get the best people there, and that's why they held a tryout session, which took the good majority of a week earlier in that spring. And I accepted because I thought it was a really cool opportunity and a different change of pace for what a special agent typically does. And so I was headed off to Virginia. I showed up there on my first day. We're in transit at this point. We sold our house in Kansas. My family was here in Wisconsin visiting family and friends. We just had a baby who, she's almost 3 now, which is insane, but she was only about 2 weeks old at the time. I go down to Virginia to report, and I was going to spend a week there to kind of get things settled. And then we were going to be closing on our house the following week. Well, I show up on my first day. They escort me to this side office where 2 unidentified, I'm assuming they were special agents, because that's what I have ascertained thus far, but they didn't identify themselves to me. They didn't show me their creds, didn't give me a business card or anything. And they just started basically interrogating me. And I was like, oh, I knew, because they brought up 2 of the things I had made protected disclosures about and claimed that I leaked them to the media. And I was like, nope, I made protected disclosures about that information to Congress, not to the media. And so I knew right then, like, they're drumming up some nonsense to suspend me. When they were done, the FBI's acting chief security officer at the unit I was supposed to be headed to, she came in and she basically read me the riot act. And the main piece of information as to why they suspended me is that they claimed that there was an allegation that I had made unprotected disclosures to members of the media, which was false from the beginning.
And why do you believe that you were suspended?
I honestly believe that it goes back to COVID, because after the vaccine mandate came out, people approached that in different ways. Some people just complied and said, what are you going to do? I'll just get the shot. And then some people kind of passively resisted, where they complied with all of the nonsense. And I think much of that is illegal, and hopefully someday will be shown to be illegal. But some people just complied with it all and said, hey, I don't have to get the shot, but if I just comply with wearing the mask and uploading a test every 72 hours, and then they changed that to every week, and they just keep changing things back and forth in an arbitrary manner. And then there were people like me who aggressively resisted and would write memos and lengthy emails and, up through the entire chain of command, or at least in my division. And in the FBI, they made a list, and you had to self-submit to this list if you weren't quote unquote vaccinated. And I really think that that's the root. They realized, oh, this guy is a dissenter. He's loud about it, and we have him on the list. And one of the reasons I point to that is because over time, then there were about 10, 12, 15 other FBI whistleblowers who've been similarly treated to me. Every single one of us that I'm aware of refused the vaccine. I had never met Marcus Allen before. And so the first time I met him was when we testified along with Steve Friend. And after we were done, they took us in this back room. And I didn't know Marcus real well back then. And I just was like, hey, Marcus, you don't have to answer if you don't want, but did you get the COVID-19 vaccine? And he was like, heck no. And right then I was convinced, because by that point I knew that Steve hadn't gotten it. I knew Kyle Seraphin, who I know you guys have had on, hadn't gotten it.
Yes.
And I knew maybe 3 or 4 other guys who had been suspended who also hadn't gotten it. And we were all hard nosed on that. And so we were on the FBI's list. And yeah, there were a couple thousand people on that list, but there weren't very many who were as loud resisting it as we were. And so I really think that that's the root of why I was treated the way I was.
So how many days have you been suspended without pay at this point?
956, I think. So September 26, 2022 was when I got suspended. And actually too, I ended up receiving a paycheck. My last pay period I got paid for was December 30. It was the pay period that ended December 31st of 2022. And that was only because of a clerical error on the FBI's part. So they would have stopped paying me sooner, but they're government employees. And so they ended up paying me too long.
What does it mean that you have been suspended without pay but not fired? I mean, what does that imply?
Right. So this is the FBI's great trap. And they have wielded this, we call it the ring of power, me and the suspendables, the other FBI whistleblowers. So for the FBI, they claim that you have to have a security clearance to even enter into FBI space to work there. And so once they take your clearance, they say, well, you can't work here anymore because you don't have a clearance. And so they go through this sham of an administrative process to suspend your clearance. So they're not necessarily, they are targeting your employment, but they're saying, well, we've got some concerns that maybe you can't hold a security clearance at this point. And just for clarification, I had a top secret SCI clearance, and I had the DOE's clearance. Oh man, I'm forgetting what it's called. But one of my extra hats was as the WMD coordinator, and so I then requested, even more access to classified material through the clearance that DOE used. It's right on the tip of my tongue. See, it's been so long, I don't even remember some of my own
It's okay.
credentials that I have, but so I had the highest level clearance you can have, which they vetted when they hired me. And there's a lengthy background process. And now they suddenly say, well, we've got some additional concerns. And so they suspend your clearance, and then they put you out to pasture because they really don't want any of this information to come to light. And look at my case, where we're well into the 32nd month of my suspension, and I'm still technically an employee. They haven't fired me. They've not moved to remove me yet. They just slowly go through the process and say, we're giving you due process. They 100% are not giving proper due process here. And they even argue that you don't have a constitutional right to a security clearance. But then, so that's how they can pull the due process in the administrative procedure. And they just string it out as long as they can to try to get you to quit. And most people do. The vast majority of people do quit. And that's all by design.
Yeah. Well, because it messes with you, right?
Yeah. Oh, it 100% does. I've been saying pretty much since the beginning that I'm a different person today. And certainly even in the beginning, I would tell my wife, because we're struggling. We're going through all these issues, and I told her, like, we're different people now. We're never going to be who we were, and we're never going to be who we thought we were going to be, because that this whole period of our life is drastically different than what we thought we were heading into because of government weaponization.
Yes. Well, there have been many calls um, uh, by Donald Trump Jr. Kash Patel himself was saying, we will bring you all back. We will bring the FBI whistleblowers, not just you, but the other ones as well, back into the FBI fold. This has not happened yet. Why do you think this is? And are we just working with a very short time that they've been in office, been in these positions, or what is going on?
I wish I had a solid answer for that. I truly don't know, because really from the election until March, me and some of the other guys, Kyle and Steve specifically, we were in touch with Kash very frequently, and we were helping him game plan for potentially becoming the FBI director. And he even told us, yeah, we're going to work on your issues, and we'll see. And now here we are. I actually just got an email this morning too from one of my attorneys over at Empower Oversight named Jason Foster, who he emailed the rest of my attorneys, which includes attorneys that Kash actually linked me up with way in the beginning. And Jason basically broke it down and said, and my numbers might be off here, but he said, Garrett's been suspended for 956 days. It's day 107 or whatever of the Trump administration. Kash Patel has been the FBI director for 75 days. I sent the FBI information, 42 days ago. We haven't heard, he basically broke it down exactly what's happened since the beginning of this administration, and is saying we're not hearing anything. So we need to orchestrate a call and discuss all this to see what's going on, because, and look, to be fair, the FBI is a complete disaster. So I know that Kash and Dan Bongino have their hands full. And although the whistleblower issue, I think, even if I'm looking at it objectively, should be important, Kash Patel testified at his confirmation hearing to Chuck Grassley that it was of a matter of supreme importance to him. Well, then why is it May of 2025 and we're still in this situation? So, because people say, oh, you got to give them time. It takes a lot of time to make a solid case. Yeah, sure. If you're looking to arrest Anthony Fauci, it does, because you really want to get that thing buttoned up properly. But personnel matters don't. I still talk to lots of people in the FBI. Almost daily, I talk to somebody from the FBI, whether it's a special agent, a contractor, an intel analyst, some other type of position, daily. And when Kash first got named by Donald Trump back in November to be his pick for FBI director, up until maybe about a month ago, I only saw an increase of people who were reaching out to me. I saw more of an uptick from former colleagues who I knew directly that were reaching out to me than ever before during this time. And all of them were excited, and they're like, man, you're finally going to get some justice. This is great. And I didn't even know a lot of these people were even keeping track. And they probably aren't daily, but they're aware enough to know that I know Kash Patel, and to know that he's going to be the FBI director and now is. And they're reaching out to say, oh, this is great. And now we have no resolution. And of course, as you would expect, those people have stopped contacting me once again, because they probably think, oh, maybe he actually did do something wrong.
Well, Kash, what do you think his mission for this new FBI is?
I think it's pretty clear. I think if you just go on his Twitter and you see the types of things he's posting about, he's just trying to change the optics of what the FBI is, of what it looks like, of what their mission set is. Because for somebody who was an FBI special agent, when I see his Twitter account or the FBI, any of the FBI social medias today versus where they were 6 months ago, it's easy for me to say, oh, they're basically doing an end around on the American people, because all the things they're posting about is stuff the FBI was doing altogether. Arresting gang members, arresting people who are trafficking fentanyl. And so they're basically just shifting the focus back to traditional criminal matters, which are things the FBI has been working all along. And I really don't think there's been much of a change. So I think he's just trying to steer public perception on what the FBI is and what it's doing. But for people who know the FBI, they know that the FBI was doing that stuff all along. And it was under Joe Biden where it became very political. Well, it was before that. I mean, the FBI, I think, has been politicized for a really long time. And so I think they're basically just in there doing damage control. I hope that behind the scenes, they're clearing the place out. And maybe that's what they're alluding to with their cryptic tweets about just give us time. Just trust me, bro. We're doing the things you want, because we're not really seeing any tangible evidence of that yet. And, there have been a lot of people, not a lot. There's been a handful of people who have taken umbrage with me or with some of the other suspended FBI guys because of our approach. And I say, try to look at it from our perspective. Here we are, people who help the current FBI director. He legitimately called us to thank us for our help and said, at one point he said, it's time we all get back to work. Well, why are we sitting here in May of 2025 then? Because there was a period where we were willing to go back and to help even more. And then, for example, just compare this or contrast it to what the IRS has done. They not only squashed all the retaliation that was happening against their whistleblowers, they promoted them. So why is there such a difference here? And then people say, well, government can't move that fast. And the new Bongino rule, instead of 72 hours, it's 6 to 8 months. Why? Because look at DOJ. Recently, Harmeet Dillon was hired to head up the civil rights section over at DOJ. And within a week, 70% of the attorneys are getting fired or being forced out or leaving. That's not 6 to 8 months. That was 1 week. Mm-hmm. So personnel, and you hear it all the time, personnel is policy. It 100% is. So why is the FBI promoting people like Steven Jensen, which a few weeks ago that came out that he was promoted to lead the Washington field office? So he's now an assistant director in charge. This guy was.
Remind us who he is.
So Steven Jensen, he during Biden's administration, he was in charge of what the FBI calls DTOS, which is the domestic terrorism operations section. And the DT section is what spearheaded all of the January 6th cases. And then this guy gets a promotion. And then we're told, you guys don't know what's going on behind the scenes. Just trust me. And maybe that's true. But if you're taking it at face value, what else are we supposed to conclude about what's actually happening there?
For sure. So we've seen that the FBI has been weaponized. It's been politicized. All of the agencies have been politicized. But what will it take to de-weaponize the FBI from your perspective?
So I don't even know if that's possible anymore because of how bad it's gotten. And people will say, well, you can't just destroy it. Why not? Do we actually need it anymore? And also, let's not forget that Kash Patel said if he became FBI director, on day one, he would send 7,000 people who work in headquarters out to the field. And he would turn the Hoover building into a museum of the deep state. He said he would do that on day one. Dan Bongino has multiple times called for the FBI to be disbanded. So that's their words. And then after my own experience, and then everything that's happened since, I also think the best route is to disband the FBI. But okay, fine, let's move off that position and say, well, we can't. Which let's not forget either. The FBI was created with a half-page memo back in the early 1900s. So why can't Donald Trump destroy it with a half-page memo? And I know there's been laws ratified since then that maybe it's not that simple. Okay, well, you can start to disband it by giving it less money, by actually sending a message and turning the Hoover Building into a museum of the deep state. But we're not seeing any of that. So what they could do then is move the majority of headquarters to a place like Redstone Arsenal in Alabama. The FBI has relatively new, just within the last few years, facilities there. There's already a large contingent of headquarters that operates out of Redstone Arsenal. Start doing things like that, because one of the problems in the FBI, and I think it's true of all the agencies, they are so hunkered in the DC area, and so many of the people that go in and out of the headquarter facilities of whatever branch of government or whatever agency of government they're in, that is why it's become politicized. It's because that whole region is the political nexus of our country. And a lot of the political types who they say, well, my position is apolitical, but they don't operate that way. And that is abundantly clear with the FBI, going back to Donald Trump's, not even just his previous administration, but his last campaign back in 2015. It should be abundantly clear to people that it's been politicized since then. I would argue that it's been a lot longer, but just look at the last 10 years of what the FBI has done.
Absolutely. So, why do you say it may not be needed?
So if there was a crime that happened in the city I worked in, and I got a lead that the criminals were from Chicago, I would pass that up my chain of command. Eventually it would land on a detective's desk, and he would take the information I provided, maybe gather some more, and most likely would call the Chicago Police Department and say, hey, I got this lead. We had some burglaries here or whatever, and we got some information that our subjects are in Chicago. So can I come down and meet with one of you and go and try and talk to these guys, or go and arrest them or whatever? And that type of thing happens regularly now, which in 1910 it wasn't, because transportation was different. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have internet. And so what you can do to bolster, which Kash Patel has kind of piggybacked off of what Christopher Wray used to say. Christopher Wray used to often say, our state and local partnerships are of vast importance to us. That's good. They should be. When I was an FBI agent, one of the first things I would do if I was outside of, or if I was heading to a place that I didn't really know the lay of the land real well, I'd go to the police station, or I'd go to the sheriff's office, and I would start there, because in my experience, every single time I did that, they already had information on the person I was talking, or I wanted to talk to, or whatever. And so law enforcement has developed over time. And what you can do then is make, basically give dual authority to local and state law enforcement officers. The government already does that. In the FBI, they have what are called TFOs, task force officers, and they come from the Wichita Police Department, or Sedgwick County Sheriff's Office, or wherever, or Kansas State Troopers. And they get sworn in to the federal level, and they have FBI credentials just like an FBI agent. And then they have the full authority of an 1811, which is a federal investigator. That's the numerical code for a special agent, or a DEA agent, or an ATF agent. You're an 1811 criminal investigator. So those guys get that dual authority, and now they can go into Missouri or Oklahoma and investigate things there. So we're already doing that, and we could continue in that way. And instead of giving the FBI $12 billion every year and a new headquarters building, we can use that funds to actually bolster state and local law enforcement officers.
That sounds like a really good plan, Garret. Has Kash Patel and Dan Bongino mentioned anything like this in their thoughts on de-weaponizing the FBI?
I don't know off the top of my head if they have, but I know that they've been briefed on that type of information, because me and Kyle and Steve have told them this type of info. This is a way that you can defang the current federal government, but it doesn't seem like they're interested in doing that. And the FBI has been one of the worst abusers in the
Yes.
last decade or so.
So we were talking about how Kash Patel said, just give us more time. But you're saying personnel can change right away. What personnel besides the Jensen official, what personnel have you seen not taken out or not brought in?
Well, I think from my perspective, and I understand that I'm very close to the subject matter, is bring in a guy like Marcus Allen. And I don't even know if he would want to go back. Bring in a guy like Steve Friend, like me. And I understand we weren't climbers, we weren't rising through the ranks, but at a minimum, we know the FBI and we have a wide network of people all across the country. So if I'm working in headquarters and I'm kind of suspicious of some of my coworkers and colleagues or things they're doing, I can start asking around and saying, hey, does this person have the FBI's best interest in mind? Or are they a swamp creature who needs to go? And we saw some removals of people before Kash got there. There was a whole list. I think there was like somewhere between like 6 and 10 people that retired. And I think by and large, those people were forced to do that. And then we saw this guy named Jim Dennehy, who was in charge of the New York field office. He retired, and I think he was basically told, like, dude, you got to retire. And that's because he was resisting DOJ, and he was resisting what the current administration wanted out of the FBI. So they basically told him to turn over the Epstein files, and he didn't do it. And Kash went there in person. It was very early on in his tenure. And within a couple of days, Dennehy retired, and he had this whole ticker tape parade type of ceremony heading out of the field office. That's a good thing. Now, I take a little bit of issue with these people being allowed to retire. And I know there are laws that dictate federal retirements and whatnot, but a lot of these people who are now collecting a pension, they did nothing but subvert the American people for potentially decades while they were there. And then you say, okay, well, you got to fill those positions with people. And how do you vet them? That was one of the areas that we were helping with. We were helping vet resumes and names and giving our input to Kash on people to either bring in or stay away from. And I'm not so sure that he really took our advice on any of that. There was one guy, I'm not gonna name him, but he was a retired agent who we recommended to Kash. Kash brought him back, and he's already gone. He already left because he basically was seeing that he was not going to make an impact.
So did you have a personal conversation with him after he left?
I did. Yeah.
And so what was his deeper reasoning, like specifics?
He didn't get too granular. He just said, I realized I wasn't going to be able to make the impact that I thought I was being brought in to make. And so I decided it was not in my best interest to stay. And he said that he had not had more than 5 minutes with Kash. And so he said, I'm going to leave. Mm-hmm.
So wait, why had he left to begin with?
So he just was coming up on retirement, and he retired right around the end of Trump's first term, I believe, if my dates are right around there. And then he moved on and was investigating in DC in a different capacity. And then and I got to know him really well over the last couple years because of his role where he was at. And then we even talked before Kash got confirmed and everything. And I was like, oh yeah, we recommended you. And then he gets brought back. And when he got there, he was excited. We were excited, and we thought he was going to be able to help in a lot of ways with the whistleblower issue. At one point before he left again, he said that they basically took that off his plate and said, don't even ask about it anymore. It's not part of your mission. And it's like, well, this is a guy who knows us personally and knows the system and knows what to do to help rectify it. And now he's already gone. So it's all these little reasons, and some of it, a lot of it isn't necessarily public yet, but it's why I am losing hope, daily in if they're going to do the right thing or not.
Why would dispersing the FBI and putting them more at the state and the local level, the district level, why would that maybe not be in the best interest of the establishment?
Well, because government exists for government's sake. And even in America, we live in this land that was created because of tyrannical government. But as history has shown time and time again, and as it's showing here in our own country now, government wants all they want is more power. They want more money from you. They want less freedoms for you, and they want you to shut up and comply. And if you don't, well, then you get put on their list, similar to the COVID list that we were on.
Hmm.
And then they keep their eyes on you. So, and that seems to be the case in any governmental agency. They're always trying to get a bigger budget. They're always trying to grow. They're always trying to add new capabilities, and they come up with whatever reasons to say, see, this is why we need this authority. FISA 702 is a great example of that, which came out of the Patriot Act. It gave the government more power to spy on its own citizens. And then when it comes up for votes, it has consistently been ratified again, even though there are people screaming from the rooftops. This is a domestic spying tool, which the FBI is not supposed to have, but they do. And so it's government's main interest is government, is what it boils down to.
So why do you think this happened to you? I mean, not looking at COVID. We know that COVID you think was a big part of it, but why do you think you?
Again, I wish I had a good answer there. And this is something I lament quite a bit. My faith I always thought my faith was strong, but it's really been tested in this period of my life. And before I testified in May of 2023, I was deposed in February of 2023 by Democrat and Republican attorneys and staff attorneys in Congress. And when I did that, I told them, because another piece of my background is I was in the infantry in the Army infantry for 6 years before I became a police officer. I had deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. And when I got home from Afghanistan, it was my last deployment. I remember getting off that plane. I got down in the front leaning rest, and I went down and I kissed the earth. And I believed then that the most difficult things I would ever do in my life were over, because I wasn't planning to re-enlist again. And I thought, all right, I'm 25. I had just turned 25. And I was like, all right, the hardest thing in my life is done. I was wrong. And as I testified in that deposition, this period of my life has been even harder than those deployments. Even combined, it's been harder. And so I wonder why a lot. And I ask God a lot, why me? And a lot of people often say, "Oh, man, you have such courage." And I think I don't. I really don't. I don't have any more courage than anybody else. I just did what I knew was right. And this is the path it took me on. And when I think about my faith, and when I think about God, and I think about his power, and I think about his sovereignty, sometimes I really struggle with his sovereignty, because he knew before I was even born that this was always going to be the path for my life. I just didn't know it yet. And our job is to faithfully walk forward, is to faithfully march, to faithfully follow our commanding officer, which is the Lord Jesus Christ. And that's what I try to do. I'm not saying I do it perfectly every time. I know I don't. And when people see me testifying or see me on a podcast, they think like, man, look at this guy, this man of courage, just this strong person. But they don't see me in my weakness. They don't see me in my fear or my stress or my anxiety or my depression, and all of which I believe are rooted in my own sin. And it has been immensely difficult. And when I wonder why, or ask God why, I don't have a clear answer, but ultimately I think it comes down to his glory. He gives us trials and tribulation that sometimes we we fail at. But he ultimately does it for his own glory. Because if he could use somebody like me, he can use anybody. Because by no means am I a perfect being. By no means do I get it right all the time. But he said, I'm going to use you, this imperfect vessel, and I'm going to mold you and shape you and use you for my purpose. And when I think of that, it's really an honor, because I'm not even deserving of a savior. I don't deserve Christ's blood. I don't deserve his death and resurrection. But God sent his own son anyways to wash away and cleanse my wickedness. And so when I think about it, I've gone back to the biblical account of Joseph quite a bit during this time. And I always end up in Genesis 50, where he says to his brothers, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. I don't know what that good is. I may never know what the good is. I've seen bits and pieces of it. There have been people who have sent me a DM on Twitter or, whatever. I've met people at speeches or events who come up to me and say, thank you for what you've done. It's led me back to Christ. I'm reading my Bible again. I'm in a Bible study or whatever the case may be. And I always walk away from those conversations thinking like, all right, this is at least a piece as to why, because I've been able to proclaim my faith in a way that I never thought possible. And honestly, in a way that I never even did before. Like people, when I was in the FBI, people in my office knew, oh yeah, Garrett's a Christian. Sure. He's mentioned that before, but I'm not talked about it or explained the gospel to people in a way like I have in this new role.
How has your faith grown? I mean, you've basically lost your job. You were displaced. I mean, physically, your family is living, with you, but from where they were before, apart from where they were before, everything's changed for you. So you had nothing else but Christ to stand on. How has your faith grown?
Yeah, that's really what it boils down to, is everything was stripped away. And too, I even get to points where I think, well, you're not in some Chinese prison camp because you were distributing illegal Bibles. So I know it could be worse, but in a place like America where you're supposed to be able to freely proclaim your faith, and honestly, I know I said COVID was the root, but what was the root of resisting the COVID tyranny? It was Christ, because we knew it was wrong. We knew it was anti what God would want for our life. And so this is a way I'm actually grateful for this too, because it would have been very easy to just turn away. And I think we see people pretty regularly. They think God is a genie in a bottle, and they think, I'm not getting what I want. I'm not getting what I deserve. I'm not getting what I earned. I'm not getting what I worked for. Oh, the only thing we deserve is death. And he still sent his son for us. And so when I look at this time and I see how my faith has grown and how it's changed, because that's all I had left to cling to. I'm actually grateful for it, because it has shown me I've had a true faith. In 1 John chapter 2, it talks about people who leave the faith. I think it's around verse 18 or so in that book, or that chapter. And it says, they went out from us because they were never of us. And so I'm humbled and deeply grateful to God for using this time of my life to show me, hey, you actually have a real faith. Your faith is being ratified every step of the way, because you're refusing to turn from it, because you know it's true. And when you say, how has it grown? When I left the police department, my sergeant, it was my last roll call. My sergeant put me on the spot, and he said, well, you got to give a speech because you're going off to the FBI, big FBI agent, Garret O'Boyle. And I was like, I don't really want to give a speech. And he's like, well, you have to. And so just off the cuff, I basically talked about getting outside of your comfort zone and how once you get outside of your comfort zone, you start to get into the growth zone. And that's what this period of my life has been. It has been outside of the comfort zone because I'm a relatively private person. And now my name is going to be part of the congressional record as long as this country exists. It's part of my family's history now. It's part of our legacy. I never would have imagined doing podcasts, testifying in front of Congress, being as public as I am. And honestly, I lament even that because the loss of one's anonymity is a greater loss than people probably realize. So many people think, oh, I want to be a TikTok star or a YouTube in, you know, video creators and have millions of followers. But it's really not that great. I don't have millions of followers, by the way. I'm lucky to have a couple thousand, but um, it's not all roses. And it, I would rather have my anonymity. I would rather have that comfort. But that's talking from my human perspective. And in reality, being perpetually in that growth zone is better because, especially when I look at the faith aspect of it. Because when I don't know what else to do, I go to my Bible or I go to my knees and I pray and I draw strength from that and I learn from God's word and I look at biblical examples of people who stood in the gap and I say, all right, I want to be like Ezekiel or Jeremiah or Isaiah or Daniel or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Because all of them, all of those people resist, or even Christ himself. It was ultimately a corrupt, tyrannical government who put him to death. He had to die because we needed our savior. But it was corrupt government who said, we don't like this guy. He keeps talking out of turn. He keeps saying things we don't like. He's going to destroy our little kingdom of dirt that we have built here.
How has this affected your family?
Yeah, another good question. I think about that a lot because I try to watch them and observe them and see areas that um, they are struggling in, or perhaps they, have more anxiety or something along those lines more than they would have. But it's hard to ascertain what their life would have been like because it went down this path. And I think when this all started, they were all very little. My oldest was only 6. I think she had, oh no, she was actually 5, I think, when this all started, and then turned 6 relatively early on. And then the other ones were even younger. But when so I got suspended in September, and then we were transient. We were living in my brother-in-law's RV because we weren't able to close on our house in Virginia because of the adverse personnel action. And so quite literally, the FBI made us homeless during that time. And we didn't know what we were going to do. Well, by November of that year, we ended up in a rental property, and I was building my girls' beds. So the older two had bunk beds at the time. And I remember like putting them together and just crying, like just some tears, coming down. And my second oldest, so she was like 4. Actually, I think she was 5 and the oldest was 6 at the time. So this 5-year-old, she comes in her room and she's like, Dad, I've never seen you cry before. And that's like one of those things that's really stuck with me because it's not that I actively thought, oh, I'm never going to cry in front of my kids. That's fine. Again, pointing to our faith, the Bible even says that Jesus wept when he, shortly before he raised Lazarus from the dead. So it's not unmanly to cry. It's not unmanly to have emotion. But I remember this little 5-year-old kid, just trying to comfort her dad. And on one hand, I think she shouldn't have to do that. That's my job, is to comfort her. And but she did it anyways because she loves her dad. And I think especially the first year or so, they were confused. They didn't know what was happening. Why is dad home all the time? Why does he seem so stressed out? I thought we were moving to Virginia. My best friend from the FBI, I don't know what I'd call him today. We don't really talk much, but they had transferred to Quantico in July of 2022. And so we were supposed to be there at the end of September. And he was really excited for his new position. I was really excited for mine. The house we were supposed to close on was like a 10-minute drive from them. Actually, I was visiting him. I was back in that area for training for that new position. And I was visiting him. It was like my last day there. And I saw this. It was the house that we were supposed to move into. It was for sale by owner. I called the owner, left a voicemail. I went and visited my friend and his family. And I got a call back. And then a week later, we were supposed to be, they accepted our offer. And I remember telling my friend that, like, dude, we're going to be even closer than we were in Kansas. Like we lived further apart there, but we were on SWAT together. We tried out for SWAT together. He was a cop before, like I was. And like we were already planning a Friendsgiving. And so then, my kids are like, are we ever going to see them again? Why are we in Wisconsin? What's happening? And how do you explain that to a 5-year-old and a 6-year-old? And then Lucy was just a few weeks old. Paige was like 2. And it's like, I don't know. And I'm sure there's more difficulties that go back even further from rooted in COVID. Like we never made our kids wear masks or anything, but they saw other people doing that. And they saw this change in society, even though for them it was very early on in their life and they're very young. They're going to be impacted by all of this. And I do wonder, say in 10 years when they're basically young adults, I do wonder, what are they going to say to me? Like, Dad, why did we grow up in a house with 1 bathroom for the 6 of us instead of this 3-acre, 5-bedroom, 3-bathroom house in Virginia that we thought we were supposed to go to? And maybe they won't ever even know that. And 2, it's all worldly anyways, but we still have to live in this world while we're here. And when mom and dad are going through immensely stressful times of life, that certainly has an impact on our children.
Yes.
And it's incumbent on us to recognize that, to be aware of that, to discuss those types of things, to help them grow and break through whatever stress and anxiety they might be bearing because of these drastic changes in their life. There's a verse in Proverbs that says, train up your child in the way they should go, and when they're old, they will never depart from it. That's our job to do that. That's a mandate to parents to do, not to the government, not to the government school or whatever other place. That is our job and our duty, and it should be a solemn, humble duty that we do with every fiber of our being. But because we're human, we can't always do that either, because
That's right.
I'm preparing for my congressional testimony, or I have another call with my lawyers, or I'm just stressed out and depressed because it's day 956.
Well,
all of that's going to impact our kids.
and this is a question I have mulled over. When the parents are stressed and don't know what's going on, they don't know how to handle it because they've never dealt with this before.
Right.
And it's quite massive. How do you translate that into recognizing, oh, that stress is going straight to the children? How do you help the children through that? I mean, it takes an outside person or outside couple, grandparents or something to maybe recognize, okay, this family needs some help.
Mm-hmm. And that's been one of the other benefits, because this is another topic we lament quite a bit, is why are we here? Why did God lead our path back to Wisconsin? We weren't planning on coming back anytime soon, maybe ever, depending on how my career would go, where we'd wind up when the girls eventually were out of high school and kind of entering into adulthood, we didn't know. We did know we were excited for the move from Kansas to Virginia to be in that area. We homeschool, so we already were thinking, yeah, we're going to do day trips to the Smithsonian or whatever else. And my wife and I, we never saw Washington, D.C. I never saw it until I went to Quantico for my initial training. My wife never saw it until she came to my graduation. And then when I testified, we did do some of the touristy stuff with the girls. And even during that, my wife and I to each other, we'd be like, man, it would have been so cool to be here. But
No, it's not. Be very, very thankful
Yeah.
you do not live outside of DC or in
Yeah.
DC.
Right.
I
Yeah.
grew up outside DC and still live in the area, and be very thankful.
Yeah. And that, I think there's a lot of truth to that. And well, there's another verse in Proverbs that says, man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps. We can have all the plans we want, but our steps are already established,
That's right.
potentially in a very drastically different way. But one of the reasons that I believe we're here is because it is such a stressful, difficult time, and we're close to family again. My wife's parents are very close, and they're some of the people who have been most actively engaged in this path that we're on, this drama that we're in, and it's over 2.5 years now. It's crazy.
Yeah. I do think that the grandparents who understand the situation, who are of like mind, those are the people who can really, really step up and help in situations like these. So I have one set of questions before I ask my final question. Recently, there has been a tremendous call for the COVID-19 vaccine mandates for federal employees and for contractors and private citizens to be named unlawful. Why is this so necessary? And what accountability can finally happen once this is stated?
It's necessary because if it is deemed unlawful, it will help prevent this type of thing from happening again. People may not realize it, but the COVID tyranny we saw and the illegality being blatantly wielded against the populace is going to leave a stain on the alleged land of the free as long as we exist. It was one of the most anti-American things that has ever happened in this nation. And recently we saw Pete Hegseth declare that the DOD mandates were unlawful.
Yes.
That is a proper step in the right direction.
Yes.
Because that is going to lead, once you say that something is unlawful, that opens up the door for criminal prosecutions.
Yes.
Because for so long we've heard, it was a crazy time. We were all figuring it out together. The government was doing their best. No, they weren't. No, they were not. They were seizing the moment to gain more power. So if we can get government to, like Pete Hegseth did, to come out and declare this was unlawful, that opens up potentially the DOJ. I know I called for the FBI to be disbanded, but if they're going to exist, well, then they should be doing righteous work and going after government actors, whether they're in government still or not. If they were engaged in this illegality from the beginning, they should be held accountable. And when I think of my time in the FBI, I mean, I got a list of people. The vast majority of them are gone. They're retired now. And they were told that was illegal by people like me, because we're sending the constitutional memo, we're sending the religious accommodation request or whatever other information to say this is why it's illegal. I mean, some of the stuff I wrote, I was citing Supreme Court case law and explaining it like it was an affidavit, which and still it was, well, we're just doing what we're told, not good enough. And I think I might have mentioned it last time I was on. All new FBI employees go to the Holocaust Memorial Museum as a part of their training. You spend a whole day there. And at the end of the day, the director of the FBI addresses your entire class. And the whole point is to tell you, just because you're in the government doesn't mean you can do this type of stuff. And it, when I think of that field trip, and it had an immense impact on me. And this is another strange similarity that me and the other FBI guys have. We didn't know each other. It's not like Steve Friend was sitting in the cubicle next to me. We started to get to really know each other after we were all retaliated against. But all of us point to this field trip because of the impact it had. And especially for law enforcement, because look at Nazi Germany. Hey, just put the star on your sleeve because the government said so. And the whole point is to say humans are capable of immense atrocities. And then later, during Nuremberg, it was, this was all illegal. And that's where you get where they say, the just following orders defense. I was just following orders. I couldn't tell you how many times people in my chain of command said, well, we're just following orders. We're just doing what headquarters told us to do. That's not how it works. If you have a reasonable belief that something is illegal, you need to stand in the gap. And you need to say, this is wrong. Especially if you're a badge-wearing, gun-toting FBI agent. And very, 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 very few did. And then those of us who did, well, look at us now. Here I'm doing a podcast with you instead of being an FBI agent. It's unacceptable. And so once something is deemed unlawful, like all of this COVID tyranny should be, then maybe people could actually start being held accountable. At a minimum, there could hopefully be some sort of restitution for people who were targeted.
I hope that the Trump administration will deem this unlawful because that's the right thing to do because it was unlawful. Where are you now? What are you doing? We know you're in Wisconsin, but what are you doing now?
Pretty much this. I do a podcast with Steve Friend 3 times a week. That's called the American Radicals Podcast. We live stream on Rumble at 10:30 Eastern, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. And then we upload to, podcast apps and YouTube afterwards. And other than that, I write a little bit. Like my shirt, it says Last Line. So if you go to Substack, if you go to lastline.substack.com, you can find what I write. Earlier this week, I actually was notified by Substack that I cracked into the top 100 in their faith and spirituality category, which was a shock to me because I don't have a ton of, I have a little bit over 1,000 subscribers. And they were like, yeah, look, you're number 68 in our faith and spirituality category. So that's kind of cool. And that's probably what I enjoy doing the most. Is putting my thoughts into written word because I'm able to clarify and articulate better, and probably honestly even better than I have here. Sometimes my brain is moving faster than my mouth or vice versa. So sometimes I get the wires crossed a little bit, but and we do a little bit of Suspendables merchandise or Last Line merchandise. So if you go to the-suspendables.com, you can get a t-shirt or stickers or a lapel pin, things like that. But other than that, yeah, it's just those things to kind of fill in the gaps. And then it's really a lot of waiting. I've had 2 job offers, which this is a little piece of the ongoing retaliation. So because I'm still technically an FBI employee, they claim I have to get their permission to get another job because they would deem it outside employment. And so one of the jobs, I was really thinking I was going to take it. It was a private security job with a guy I was in the military with, and he basically headhunted me and was like, and then I told him everything that was going on. He's like, I don't think they're going to care. So I went out. It was in northern Wisconsin. I went up there, visited with all of them, kind of interviewed with the people I'd be helping protect, and they're like, yeah, we want to give you this job. And then we emailed a little bit back and forth. And then they said, this job will be waiting for you, but we don't want to, because I told them, I'm like, look, I got to tell the FBI because I will be requesting outside employment. And they basically said, the job will be waiting for you, but we don't want to get involved with any of the FBI stuff because we are worried that they will retaliate against us like you have. And so that kind of fizzled out. And then because I was, law enforcement's my background. So then I saw a job, actually a retired FBI agent who works here. So it's called the LESB. It's the Law Enforcement Standards Board of the state of Wisconsin. There's a retired FBI agent who I've gotten to know over the last couple of years who works there. And he pinged me last summer and said, "Hey, there's this job. I think you'd be a good fit." And it was nearby to me. It was in the county I live in, which is in the county I worked in. I worked for a place called the City of Waukesha. It's the county seat. That's where I was a police officer. And so I applied to this tiny police department and I got an interview. And I was like, I'm sure I'm the most qualified candidate for this. I used to be a freaking FBI agent. And they didn't know anything about my background. And so once I started going down the rabbit hole a little bit during the interview, I was like, this isn't going to happen. They called me a few days later and they said just that. And they led with, "Hey, Garret, it's got nothing to do with what you got going on with the FBI, but we're going to go in a different direction." And that was the first time in my adult life that I was not given the job that I had applied for. And that includes, the FBI, it includes the police department, it includes FBI SWAT, which I tried out for and was selected for after an interview process. It includes that new unit I was headed to. So my trajectory was going like this, and now I can't even get hired at a tiny police department. Then I got one other job offer, and we did get to the point of emailing the FBI about that. They never responded. So then that job offer went away too.
Well, I'm really sorry, Garret. My prayer for you is that things turned around really quickly. Why not just fire you? Why do they continue to keep you on?
I think the reason is that would open them up to an employment lawsuit, because it would be like a wrongful termination lawsuit.
Yeah,
And
a
they don't
good
want to
reason.
deal with that. Right. So, look at this. Look at how crazy this retaliation is. They won't fire me. They say I'm still an employee. They won't reinstate me. They suspended my clearance and then just this past July finally revoked it. Well, here we are 10 months after they revoked my clearance and I'm still waiting. And then on top of it, we have this new administration and an FBI director who I know personally. And I'm still just, here I am.
If the average American citizen could do one thing to combat the corruption that they see within our country, what would it be?
One thing, turn to Christ, because that's where you're going to get your strength. That's where you're going to get your boldness. And that's where you're going to get your power. We actually have a t-shirt that we sell. It says power real big on it. And it goes back to when I was testifying. There's this Bible verse that's 2 Timothy 1:7. And it says, God has not given us a spirit of cowardice, but of power, self-discipline, and love. And so, because I know a lot of people are scared, they're afraid to speak up. They're afraid to do what's right when everybody else is doing what's wrong. That's what Satan wants. He wants you just to shut up. He wants you to be quiet. He wants you to live in fear. But you will get power from the Holy Spirit. So
Absolutely.
that's really the one thing people can do. And then from there, exercise your vote. I know I've got tons of my own concerns about election integrity and voting machines and whatnot. But for now, we still have the ability, and maybe it's just a charade, but we still have the ability to go vote. A lot of people throughout history never had that opportunity. And then be active in your community. Maybe run for office yourself. Maybe if it's just mayor of the small town you live in, who knows, school board. You have to get involved. It's easy to come and listen to a podcast or to sit and talk on a podcast, but you gotta be engaged and involved more, because it's Steve Friend says that America isn't a noun, it's an action verb. You have to do America. And the reason we have fallen into such tyranny is because of that comfort, because we've had it for so long. It's been so good. And a lot of political stuff, what the government's doing, I just don't pay attention to that stuff. Well, if you want to hold on to the America that you thought you had, you must.
That's right. That's really good. Garret, thank you so much for joining me. It was really good to see you again, and all my best to you all.
Thanks, Stephanie, and thanks for having me back.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Please like, comment, subscribe to, and share our podcasts. I'll see you next time.